This is Dick Lyford. The Honorable Bruce M. Snell Jr. of Ida Grove was appointed to the Iowa Court of Appeals as one of its original members in 1975. He was appointed to the Iowa Supreme Court in 1987 and served until his retirement in 2001. Join Judge Larry Eisenhower for the oral history of the Honorable Bruce M. Snell Jr.
Good afternoon, Justice Snell. We're here at the Judicial Building for the purpose of an oral history interview of you, where we've done these of several justices and judges, and this is your turn. Your name is Bruce M. Snell Jr., and it appears that you served on the Court of Appeals from 1975 to 1987, and on the Supreme Court from 1987 until you retired in 2001. Where are you from?
I was born and raised in Ida Grove, Iowa.
And where do you live today?
Ida Grove, Iowa.
Have you ever lived out at Ida Grove?
Yes, I have lived in a number of places, literally all size communities. I lived in Greene, Iowa, which is even smaller than Ida Grove, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I've lived in Waterloo, Des Moines, and Larchmont, New York, which is a Westchester suburb of New York City.
As I understand, those were all career moves on your part. Let's start with your schooling and your early days in Ida Grove. Can you describe that a little bit for us?
Well, Ida Grove is a typical Iowa small town, although we think it's way above average, of course. And my schooling was in the public school, and I received what I thought was a good education there. It got me into college. I went to Grinnell College for undergraduate and graduated with a degree there in history. And then subsequently I graduated from the Iowa Law School.
Let's go back to Ida Grove just briefly. Your parents were from Ida Grove as well?
They were. My family has been there a long time. My grandfather, T.S. Snell, came in 1872, and he was a graduate of Syracuse University as a civil engineer. He was practicing his career as a civil engineer for the railroad, and got as far as Ida Grove, received a telegram that the railroad had gone broke and he no longer had a job. So he looked around, I guess, and decided to just stay. And he did. And then he became, he did a number of things, but he became the first county superintendent and the first one to establish a 12-year school in the public school system. And he stayed in Ida Grove permanently and raised his family. My dad and two brothers and a sister. The two brothers became lawyers. And my aunt, Catherine Snell, became a professor of education at Drake University.
And did your father practice law in Ida Grove?
He practiced law in Ida Grove, and he had a branch office in Holstein. But he practiced with his brother Thad Snell, and the older brother Roy Snell practiced in Hayward. And Dad practiced with his brother Thad until 1941, when he was appointed by the governor as a district court judge.
You remember how old you were at the time?
I was 12.
Okay. Do you remember your father as being anything other than a judge?
I do not.
Okay.
I never saw him try a case, and I was in his office off and on as a young kid, but I learned virtually nothing about the practice of law. The same was true when he became a judge. He judged from 41 until 1960, when he was elected to the Supreme Court. And I graduated from high school in '47. During that time, I never saw him try a case or do anything as a judge, and he, on purpose, never discussed any cases with the family, and so I knew he was a judge, and that was about it.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had two older sisters, Dorothy and Virginia, and I was a young brother, 6 years younger than Virginia.
So your father was elected to the Supreme Court. Was he elected to the district court as well?
He was appointed by Governor Wilson to the district court. And, but at that time, the Supreme Court was in a political system where in order to be a member of the Supreme Court, you had to be nominated by either the Republican or the Democratic Party. And then you were elected by the vote of the people. And my dad was the last elected Supreme Court justice.
Was he a Republican or a Democrat?
He was a Republican. And the system was that the Republicans had their state judicial nominating convention. And it was the same political process as now exists in other in normal political conventions. And each person who wanted to be nominated went around to the various county delegations soliciting their vote, which my dad did, and also at that time Justice Peterson did, and C. Edwin Moore. And my wife and I were delegates. I was a lawyer in Ida Grove at that time, and we were delegates. And C. Edwin Moore came around soliciting our vote until he saw my name and laughed and said he guessed he better spend his time more profitably someplace else.
So that was in 1960 when your dad ran.
That was in 1960.
Now, did
Dad
he run?
was nominated and elected. And 2 years later, C. Edwin Moore was appointed to the Supreme Court.
So you say your father was the last justice elected to the Iowa Supreme Court?
He was, because in 1962, the state of Iowa adopted in the Iowa Constitution a change in the way judges were appointed or elected to office.
To our current.
And the political system was abandoned, and instead the merit system for the appointment and election of judges was instituted through the Iowa Constitution.
Okay, well, let's go back, and you attended Grinnell College. You recall any experiences there you want to share with us?
Well, I had a very fine time at Grinnell College. It was a bit unusual because I started in 1947, and the returning servicemen from World War II came back to get an education. And they were there, and they ran the college. And at that time, full-scale hazing was in force. And Grinnell did not and does not have fraternities. But it's set up on the hall system, which is like Oxford University has. And you're a member of Hall. I was a member of Smith Hall, so I was a Smithman. But there was the control of the social structure by the returning servicemen, and they believed in full-scale hazing. So we went through that for a full semester. We wore beanies, had to bow to the upperclassmen, and every Monday they fined us with a certain real or imagined offenses, and then broke pine boards over our backside. It was a real initiation, but nobody got hurt. It was just the way the system was. Now abandoned, of course.
So that was your first semester when you were a freshman in college?
Right.
Okay. Now, you completed your undergraduate work at Grinnell?
I did, yeah.
And what was your major?
I majored in history. I started out as an economics major, and then when I took a history course, I thought that was more interesting, and so then I became a history major.
Any particular era of history that interested you?
No, just the general history of world civilizations, I suppose. And I took all sorts of history courses. I found the history professors very stimulating and very interesting, which was why I continued to be a history major.
At what point in your life did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
Well, I think that was an evolving thing. I never started out in grade school or high school thinking that's the only thing I want to do. And my father and mother, they never pushed in any degree that I should be a lawyer. They didn't, they always told me about what an honorable profession it was, and I could see that. And that it was a fine career. If I wanted to go into it, that would be good. But if I didn't, that would be fine too. And so I just had that in mind going through college. And you could go to law school having majored in history, economics, political science, literature, whatever. And I just, little by little, thought, maybe I'll want to be a lawyer. I also had thought maybe I wanted to go into the Foreign Service, which tracks, I guess, with my interest in history. And so I really hadn't, I had thought that I probably would go to law school. But then I was given the opportunity to think more on it because I was drafted in the Army.
Was that immediately after graduation? that you
It
got
was.
drafted?
In fact, the draft board gave me a semester deferment to finish college.
Undergraduate. Okay. So you went into the Army in 1951?
Right.
And where did you serve? What
I was an enlisted man. I served in Germany from 1951 to 53. And that was during the Korean War. And I just, purely by the luck of the draw, I was sent to Germany. But after the latter part of 1952, the Korean War ended, and the armed forces, to the extent then existing, were not needed anymore. And so we were summarily discharged.
How long did you serve in the Army then?
2 years.
2 full years.
No.
So
Then I got out of the Army in July and registered for law school coming up in September.
now you registered at the University of Iowa, I presume.
Right.
Did you think about other law schools, or?
Not really. My dad had graduated from the University of Iowa. I suppose that was a factor.
Yeah.
And I didn't really look into any other. I just thought I'd go there.
Now, when you started law school, did you have some idea what career path you wanted to follow?
Well, this is a discourse on the undecided, I guess, because I have the same answer to the question, when did I decide to be a lawyer? I went through law school with interest and fascination, but without any goal that I wanted to be a trial lawyer or a corporate lawyer or some other kind of lawyer, public service lawyer. I was just there, I guess, trying to get through, and figured whatever came later would happen.
What memories do you have of your law school experience?
Well, that was a lot of fun. And, it was very stimulating. And a number of us had been in the service, so we were a little older. A number of my friends were married. I wasn't. But Dave Hammer was married, and he was a good friend of mine at Grinnell. And he was in the Army, came back to went to law school. And Art McGivern was married. And so I studied with them, and as I recall, their wives treated me very nicely to a meal.
Now, you returning GIs didn't haze the first-year law students like you were treated at Grinnell, did you?
No, there was none of that. Everybody was pretty buckled down, working hard to make grades.
Who was the dean at the law school at the time?
The dean was Mason Ladd,
Okay.
and he was a character. The Drake Law School dean was a character too. I think they matched each other in that regard. And Mason Ladd also taught the course in evidence, and he was very demonstrative in his descriptions of questioning and answers, and he bounded around the room and made it very entertaining.
Now, you mentioned Art McGivern a moment ago, and of course you ended up on the Supreme Court with Art McGivern later, didn't you?
Right. Art was the Chief Justice, and had been on the Supreme Court for some years when I was appointed in 1987. And when I went on, then the court elected him as Chief Justice. And I was moderately amused that they didn't let me vote. They said that I wasn't, they'd taken care of that before I got on. So. I would have voted for it, though.
Any other law school reminiscences you have?
Well, I thought law school was a fascinating experience. I think we only had 13 professors. So they each one taught several different courses. And part of the fascination to me was that the professors were all different, unique. They had some who were pretty much a cold law type professor who taught the law as it is. We had some that were, Professor Vestal was a constant questioner in the mode of the Harvard
Socratic method?
The Socratic method, well, and also getting right on top of your face, practically, and wanting to get answers and put you on the spot. Then we had others that were more of an intellectual type of law teaching. It was a splendid variety, which I enjoyed.
You clerked for a judge immediately after law school. How did that come about?
I clerked for Judge Henry Graven, who was the district court judge in northern Iowa at that time. And the way it came about was that Dean Ladd stopped me in the hall before the second semester of my senior year. And he said, Bruce, I heard a rumor that you plan to get married before the next semester. Is that true? And I said, well, yes, it is, Dean. I'm going to get married between semesters. And Dean Ladd said, well, do you really think that's a good idea since you don't have any job? And I smiled and I said, there's no problem at all, Dean. My wife has a fine job as a nurse in the University of Iowa Hospital. She had graduated in '54 and had been working there. He laughed and went off into his office. And then I shortly found out from the dean that the reason for his question was that he had selected me to be Judge Graven's law clerk, and Judge Graven wanted a single man. And that presented a dilemma for him. So he talked to the judge, and Judge Graven said, well, he would interview me and Ann. And so we made the arrangement, and we drove to Greene, Iowa, and we were interviewed by Judge Graven in his office. And he liked Ann very well, and I was hired.
Well, you say the dean had selected you for this clerkship. Did the dean select students to be clerks for other judges as well? Or do you know?
I don't know. And there were not many clerkships then. There were none on the state court. And on the federal court, there was the clerkship with Judge Graven. And then I don't know whether there were any circuit court judgeships available or not. And normally there would have been a clerkship available for the Southern District Judge, but he was in the process of being confirmed by the United States Senate, having been appointed by the President. And it turned out he never got confirmed, so he never became a federal judge. And all of the time that I was working for Judge Graven, he was the only federal judge for the whole state of Iowa. And so we traveled around holding court in all of the court points in Iowa, which were Davenport, Dubuque, Des Moines, Mason City, Cedar Rapids, Sioux City, Council Bluffs.
Yeah.
We saw the whole state.
Yeah, you mentioned Greene. Did Judge Graven live in Greene?
He lived in Greene.
Did you live in Greene?
And we lived in Greene. Ann and I rented an apartment in the upstairs of an old hotel. And that was another really prerequisite for my getting the job, was that the wife would have something to do. And he was very concerned about that because he had had some problems in the past with the law clerk's wife.
So that was why he was looking for a
very,
single man.
very lonely and bored.
Yeah.
Well, Ann got a job as a nurse at Charles City Hospital.
So you did get married between your
Yeah,
semesters? And
we did.
Okay.
We did. So she was working all the time that we were gone. I say we, which was Judge Graven, me, and Judge Graven's secretary, Donald Johnson. And we rode all over the state in his big Nash car. I was the driver, bailiff, and law clerk. We were gone all week. We left on Sunday, got back Friday afternoon, and we had to make sure we were back then because the judge wanted to go to the high school football games, which I went to too. I wanted to see him too.
What was Judge Graven a trial court, state court judge before he was on the federal bench, or do you remember?
He was. I think that's right. He was a trial judge, a state district court trial judge.
But he was originally from Greene and
He was.
always lived in Greene, did he?
Yeah, he did. That's where he practiced law and stayed there forever.
Did you get, while you worked for Judge Graven, I know you were traveling all over the state, did you ever get assigned out of the state? Did you ever get assigned
No.
anywhere else?
No, we didn't.
Probably too busy.
I think that's right. It was a big load, covered the whole state.
So that was a 1 year?
That was a one-year appointment.
Do you remember what you were paid as a clerk in 1956?
I was paid $5,600.
What kind of benefits?
That was good pay.
What kind of benefits did you have? You remember?
I don't remember we had any benefits. I don't think there was any.
Well, okay, so you're a law clerk, you're looking for, thinking about your career. Where did you end up next after clerking?
I had the opportunity to go to New York City. A graduate of the Iowa Law School who had practiced law in the Manhattan downtown law firm, and then was hired by Union Carbide Corporation to be on their staff. And he was sort of the heir apparent, because, which turned out he later became a general counsel for Union Carbide Corporation.
You remember his name?
John Sticknoth.
Was he originally from Iowa?
Yes,
Okay.
he was. And he went out to become a New York lawyer and liked it and stayed. And I went there to see what it was like to be a corporate lawyer. And so I found out about that and became a New York lawyer, passed the New York bar. I'm still a New York lawyer, I guess, but I didn't stay.
Okay. Had you taken the Iowa bar right after
I had.
law school?
Yeah. So I'm a member of both bars.
Anything unique about that New York bar examination?
Well, it was, I thought, quite unique, very much more complicated in the investigation of you. The examination was very complete, like the Iowa one was. But after you completed and passed the examination, then they had a questionnaire which asked, among other things, where you were born and where you had lived and the addresses of every place you had ever lived in. And also, you had to also list every employer you'd ever had, whether casual or not, and produce a recommendation from the employers. And if the employer was dead, a recommendation from somebody who knew the employer, but who would stand in the employer's stead and recommend you. And that took some time to get all that information together. And, so this was just the way they did things. Then you had to be recommended, after all that was completed, by a member, a sitting member of the Board of Law Examiners, bar examiners. And I think there were 4 divisions. I was in the 2nd division. The state of New York was divided into 4 divisions. And I think the 2nd division maybe had 15 members of the bar examiners. So you had to know one of those persons or figure out something else. Well, it turned out that where we were living in Larchmont, I became a friend of Randall Holden, who was a lawyer, and his father was a member of the bar examiners. So he said that he would speak to his father on my behalf to see if I could be recommended. And then his father arranged to interview me by telephone. I was in my office in Manhattan. He was in his office on Long Island. And that's the way the interview went. And he liked and accepted what he heard, so he recommended me. So that's how I became a member of the New York bar.
I have seen that while you were a member of that staff at Union Carbide, you did have a law review article published. Did you write that while you were working for Judge Graven?
I did, and that was one of Judge Graven's requirements of the law clerk, that he wanted a law review article to be written and published by the law clerk while working.
Where was that published?
In the Iowa Law Review.
You recall
that was an examination of the evidentiary rule on no eyewitnesses. And so I wrote this article, and I styled it Eyeing the No Eyewitness Rule, which in my youth, I thought that was kind of clever. And I presented it to Professor Sandy Boyd, who later became the president. He was the law review advisor at that time, and he looked at that and suggested that we didn't really need to have it styled that way, do we? And I said, well, I kind of liked it, and so he backed off and said, well, okay. He wasn't all that thrilled with that.
So you were at Union Carbide for roughly a year, is that?
Let's see, 2 years.
2 years. Did you enjoy that experience?
I did. And Union Carbide had a staff of about 15 lawyers, and we were in-house counsel. And also had an arrangement with the law firm of Kelly Dry in New York City. But the basic work was done, corporate law work, by the 15 lawyers. I worked for John Sticknoth, who hired me. Of course, the head of the department hired me, but on John's recommendation. And I worked on a lot of different things, drafted contracts and reviewed contracts and various, quite a range of corporate problems.
You obviously chose not to stay in New York. What made you decide to return to Iowa?
I enjoyed the corporate work, but my wife would say, which is true, that she found that I was kind of bored. I didn't find it as stimulating as I had hoped. And that was one reason. The other reason was I looked at the New York City landscape and Westchester County and the lifestyle there, and I just didn't think I wanted to live there the rest of my life and have my career there. I really liked the Midwest better. So we moved back to Iowa.
And where did you move to?
Moved to Waterloo, and I became an associate lawyer with a law firm there, Beecher Buckmaster, Beecher and Lindeman, and did a variety of associate lawyer work with that firm, which was a great experience too. And that then led to my having Evan Heltman, who was elected Attorney General, and he offered me a job as an Assistant Attorney General.
He was from Waterloo.
And he was from Waterloo. And he offered me that job, and there were only 13 Assistant Attorney Generals at that time. I thought that would be a great experience and broaden my knowledge of the law and my understanding of the various aspects of legal problems. So I accepted that job and moved to Des Moines and worked as an assistant for Curly Hellman for 4 years. I liked it so well, I just stayed.
Yeah. Where was your office?
It was in the Capitol, and we had offices on the first floor. The Attorney General's office was right inside the door, and we had offices across the hall, and then we had offices in some of the other floors. And at one time, I had an office on the 4th floor, which was very isolated, but a great place to get work done. Some of us office there.
You were an Assistant Attorney General. What sort of work were you doing?
Well, I was the lawyer for the Public Safety Department, and that was the whole Public Safety Department. I was the Highway Patrol, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the private detectives, and then I also was at different times. I wasn't always the lawyer for all of the different agencies that I served, but at one time I was the lawyer for the Social Welfare Department, and the Board of Medical Examiners, Board of Engineers, various other boards, and then I tried some cases involving charitable trusts, which one of them was a $1 million case where I was able to convince the Supreme Court to uphold a gift which was in a charitable trust, which was worded in such a way that it was very suspect. And then we had to convince that the testator was of sound mind and so forth.
Now, you remember how many cases you argued before the Supreme Court? Roughly?
Probably half a dozen.
Okay. Your father was on the Supreme Court at the time, right?
He was, and I argued one case where he, of course, recused himself, so it was to an 8-judge court, and it was a very significant case because it involved the doctrine of governmental immunity, which at that time forbade suits against the state. And this case involved a highway patrolman in Cherokee, Iowa, and of course the state also, who had set up an inspection of vehicles at the bottom of a hill in downtown Cherokee. Cherokee has some pretty good hills. Turned out that was a very bad decision because a truck loaded with tar came down the hill, lost its brakes, and the driver fortunately turned the truck over so that nobody got killed or injured, but it poured a load of tar into this resident's basement. that was a terrible mess, and of course it resulted in a lawsuit. And I had pretty good grounds for upholding the immunity of the state from suit. I had over 50 years of precedence in all kinds of cases, and I cited them. I was fairly confident that I was in good shape, but I wasn't. The Supreme Court decided that that was the case. They were going to abandon the doctrine of governmental immunity, and so I lost.
Despite the 50 years of precedent.
Yeah, so much for all that precedence.
So you were at the AG's office for roughly 4 years, 5 years?
Yes, 4 years.
And then what did you do?
Well, then the Republicans had been in the control of the state government for a lot of years, and Curly Heltman was a Republican, and I was a Republican. I guess all the staff, most of them, were Republicans. And Curly Heltman ran for governor, and he was defeated by Harold Hughes. And Bill Bump, who was the Solicitor General then, ran for Attorney General, and he was defeated. So effectively, we were out of office. And so everybody was looking for a job, and Larry Scalise was the lawyer who was elected Attorney General, and Larry offered me a job to stay on, and which I appreciated very much. I thought that was very generous of him. But I decided that it was time for me to move on to do some other work.
And what did you do?
So that's what I did. I went back to Ida Grove and opened my office as a sole practitioner. And I practiced as a sole practitioner for 11 years there. And we moved back to Ida Grove, and so I'd come full circle.
Yeah.
Totally unintentionally.
Did you have children by then?
Yes, we did. We had two. We have a boy and a girl, Brad and Rebecca. And so they.
Where were you when they were
Grove.
born?
Pardon me?
Where were you when they were born?
Rebecca was born in Waterloo. Brad was born in Des Moines.
You want to describe your practice a little bit there?
I had a very typical general practice, small town general practice, which was an office practice of wills and estates and tax and whatever trials I could get, and I did, which were not very many. Unfortunately, there were a couple of well-established trial lawyers in nearby towns that got the business. But I tried a few cases and argued motions, tried them to a district judge. I never did have a jury trial.
No. Is that right? So bank work, real estate, those kinds of things all?
Right. It's pretty much anything that would come through the door in a small town, drawing wills and advising people on estates. And it was fun. I enjoyed it.
So you've been back in Ida Grove since 1965, and you've never left your residence there, have you?
Right.
You still live in the same house?
No, actually, when I opened my practice in Ida Grove, we wanted to rent a place. We couldn't find any place that we thought would work out. And so we rented a house in Arthur, Iowa, which is 7 miles from Ida Grove. And Arthur is a town of about, then it was probably about 1,000. Ida Grove was 2,300. It's now shrunk to 2,000, I saw with the last census. So I commuted from Arthur, Iowa, 7 miles to my office in Ida Grove. We lived there about a year, I guess, and then we bought a house in Ida Grove. Lived in that house until my folks, my dad died, and they had decided even before that to move into an apartment. So then we moved to the old.
You're back in the family home?
Back in the family home. So that's even another full circle of surprising happening.
At what point along the line did you start thinking you'd like to be a judge?
I don't know. I suppose that was an evolving process too. I did not set my goal, even then, at being a judge, although during that 11 years of practice, I know I was thinking about it. And then I did apply, maybe after 5-6 years, to be nominated for a district court judge vacancy. And I applied twice and couldn't get nominated. And before that, I thought that it would be a good idea to be county attorney and get to meet people and build my practice. And so I threw my hat in the ring for county attorney, which had some fairly big obstacles. I was a Republican, and Dick Branco was a Republican. He'd been county attorney for about a dozen years and was a very good county attorney. And so, but I forged ahead, went around telling people that I should be a county attorney, and about the only thing I could honestly think was a good reason was that it was time for a change.
Very phrase.
And that did not go over well enough to defeat Dick Branco. And so I had some interesting runs at elected office that didn't turn out, but it was fun. I did get around and meet a lot of people. I enjoyed that.
Well, ultimately, you were appointed to the the original Iowa Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
And describe how that happened.
Well, that happened fortuitously also. I went to a state bar meeting, and at the luncheon, they were honoring members of the Iowa Supreme Court, which is traditional and still happens. And after the luncheon, Dave Harris started visiting with me, and he said, Bruce, are you going to apply for the Court of Appeals? And I said, what's that? I wasn't even up and knowledgeable enough to recognize that the legislature had established a new court. And so Dave told me what that was, and he said, why don't you apply for that? So I did. And, again, I thought that was a good idea, but I had no notion of my prospects, but it sounded like a great job, and so I applied, and I was nominated.
How long had you known Justice Harris at that point?
I had known him not well, but probably 15 years. I knew him just casually because he was a district court judge when my dad was a district court judge. Dad was the old judge, and Dave was the new judge. So I was acquainted with him, but that was about it. He gave me some very good advice, and he helped me. He did, I'm sure, talk to some of his friends to boost my prospects.
Okay. So you submitted your application to the State Nominating Commission and for the first Court of Appeals?
Right, and the system then and now is that you call the nominating commissioners and seek to have an interview with them. And that's what I did, and that's what everybody who was interested did. That involved traveling around the state to their homes or their offices to meet with them and have a personal interview. And most of them granted the interview to everybody. Occasionally, some did not, which I thought was not appropriate. But I traveled around the state from northwest Iowa to southeast Iowa. And I think there must have been 10 commissioners. And I interviewed with them, and occasionally I would run into somebody else who was doing the same thing.
That original court was 5 members, correct?
Right.
And were all of those appointed at the same time?
Yes, they were.
So how many names were submitted to the governor then?
15.
Okay.
And then 5 were selected.
You remember how many applicants there were?
I don't remember. There were a lot. Maybe 30 or more. There were a lot.
So the original
Because it was a brand new court, and it was kind of
the original appointees to the Court of Appeals were, there was Carter, Snell, Donaldson, Albee, who's the fifth?
Oxford.
Oxford.
Yeah,
And so 3 of those individuals were district judges, as I recall.
they were.
And that resulted in a lawsuit, right?
That resulted in a lawsuit by one of the state senators. And he, it's hard to know what his motives were. Personal, because of other friends who were not appointed, or the system, or who knows what all was behind it. But there was the lawsuit which took aim not at me. I was the only one who was a practicing lawyer, not a judge. That's not right. Barney Donaldson was United States Attorney.
Right.
I was in private practice. And we were not aimed at, except that we were thrown in the mix. And the lawsuit was trying to throw out all 5 of us on the ground that the 3 district court judges who were appointed, Albee, Oxford, and Carter, could not be appointed to the Court of Appeals. And the theory was that they were still sitting district court judges and hadn't resigned. Mm-hmm. And the Attorney General, Dick Turner, promoted that idea and had some theories that violated the Iowa Constitution. That was argued before the Iowa Supreme Court, and the Iowa Supreme Court confirmed the validity of our appointments and threw the whole lawsuit out.
So how long was it between the time you were all appointed until this litigation got resolved so you could start working?
It was not long. The Supreme Court expedited it. And Mark McCormick was a sitting Supreme Court justice at that time, and he wrote the opinion. And I think the opinion, I'll bet it came out within a couple of weeks after it was argued, which was on purpose.
Why don't we take a short break?
Yeah, that's good.
You were, Justice Snell, you were appointed to the Iowa Court of Appeals, the original Iowa Court of Appeals in 1975, is that correct? That's
right. There were 5 of us, and 3 were sitting district court judges, and I was a practicing lawyer in private practice, and Barney Donaldson was the United States District Attorney.
Now, I've heard stories about the Court of Appeals in those days. One of the good ones is that you were not paid any per diem to come down here to work. Is that correct?
Oh, that is correct, and that affected Judge Carter and me, because Jim Carter lived in Cedar Rapids, I lived in Ida Grove, and we got no per diem. The other 3 lived in the Des Moines area, and so Judge Carter and I devised the answer to that was to sleep in our offices, which we did. And I had a hide-a-bed, which I had hauled down here, and the maintenance people at the state capitol were very helpful and kind to haul it from my truck to my office. And
where was your office?
It was in the Capitol on the 2nd floor, right across from the Supreme Court.
So again, you've come full circle. You've been in the Capitol before, and now you're back in the Capitol again.
Right, that's exactly right. And we had. That was later on. We had temporary offices before. We got the really nice offices.
Where were the temporary offices?
It was in a rented building on East 14th Street. And after that, we were able to move into the basement of the Capitol. And we were there for some time. Then we moved into our permanent offices across from the Supreme Court courtroom. And I was fortunate to be able to sleep there, and so was Judge Carter, because we had a shower in those facilities, which had been installed in the old vault. The vault had been the vault used for the Secretary of State, who later moved, but it was still there. Of course, they remodeled it into a shower, but the vault door was standing open there. We made sure that it didn't accidentally close us in.
So how did you determine seniority? How did you determine seniority on that court, since you were all appointed at the same time?
We elected the chief judge, who was Judge Oxberger. And then the rest of seniority was by age. The three who were residents in the Des Moines area were given the choice of offices by agreement of Judge Carter and me, since we were not going to office all the time in our Des Moines office. Then Judge Carter and I drew straws for who got the selection of the fourth office in various times of moving. I think we had 3 different moves we made. And we had an interesting experience while Judge Carter and I were sleeping in our offices. One of the guards came in and had a light in my face as I was in bed, and wanted to know who I was and what I was doing there, and I told him. And then he said, "Who's that next door?" I said, "That's Judge Carter from Cedar Rapids." And with that, he just left. It was too baffling, I think, for him to ask any more questions.
That's good. How long was it before you got a per diem then?
It was about 6 years.
Yeah. Was the expectation...
It cost Judge Carter and me a lot of money.
Was the expectation that judges would move to Des Moines? Was that the idea?
That was part of the political process. Some of the legislators were of the view that every judge should live in Des Moines. And others had a view that this was going to be an extra expense for a new court, and they just didn't want to spend any more money. So it was a combination of those circumstances, and to get the votes to establish the Court of Appeals, as in all of the political process, you had to, those who wanted the bill passed had to satisfy those who had other ideas.
So you continued to live in Ida Grove, obviously. Did you have an office in Ida Grove?
I did, and I provided my own office at my own expense.
At your home or at the courthouse?
Well, it was actually in the house that my grandfather built in the late 1800s. And it had been the home of my grandmother after my grandfather died, and then the home of my Aunt Catherine after she retired, and then she left that to me by her will. And so when I was appointed Court of Appeals judge, I moved from my downtown office into those quarters.
Now, once you became a justice of the Supreme Court, did you have an office at the courthouse?
No.
Or did you just continue to use
Just
that?
continue to use that. And that got involved in a very contentious dispute among the citizens of Ida County on what to do about the old courthouse. Should it be repaired? Should a new one be built? Should it be in that location or out in the park a mile away or downtown? And the whole question went through 5 separate bond issue referendums, all of which failed. And about the time the 6th one came up was when I was appointed to the Court of Appeals, and I really didn't want to get involved. A lot of the issue was the expense, and I didn't want to add more expense by having an office there, which is what I did, and that it was costly. Maybe not the best judgment on my part.
So you maintained,
monetarily it wasn't, but it did have the advantage of privacy in my work, and I enjoyed that. And subsequently, the bond issue did pass for an addition to the courthouse.
okay. Have you ever had an office in the Ida County Courthouse then?
No,
No.
never did.
How about your law clerks, once you got on the Supreme Court?
Because of that situation, I thought that I didn't really have any office for a law clerk, except where I was, which wasn't really a suitable office for a law clerk. And I thought that it was more advantageous for me to have my law clerk office in my office in Des Moines, wherever it was. And I thought that the law clerk might prefer to live in Des Moines too. Although that really never came up then, because I thought that this arrangement was good for the law clerks researching applications in being a law clerk, which gave the law clerk the availability of the state law library for research, which was nothing like living in Ida Grove. So that's the way I did that. Harvey Ulenhop did the same thing with his law clerk when he was on the Supreme Court.
But for the most part, don't the justices have an office in the local courthouse and have their law clerk work in the local court with them?
You mean the Court of Appeals?
Well, I'm talking about the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. Most of them did office in a local courthouse.
Yeah, now on the Court of Appeals, did you have a law clerk available from the beginning to you?
Yes.
Okay.
We did.
But
and
they've always...
also in supplement to your answer, Judge Harris, who officed in the courthouse in Jefferson, most of the time had the law clerk office there. But the last year or two, he had his law clerk office in the Capitol. Same as mine did.
Yeah, I think over the years, the law clerks for the Court of Appeals have always worked in Des Moines, haven't they?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Well, you were on that court for a number of years, from 75 to 87, so you've...
76 to 87.
76 to 87, 11 years on the Court of Appeals.
Right.
Did it expand from 5 to 6 while you were on there?
It did, and that was by the legislature's establishing a 6th judge. We were able to convince the legislature that that was needed because of the volume of the cases. And the Supreme Court was wanting to have the Court of Appeals do the volume of casework, do the most of the appellate work, which is the way it started, and that's the way it's continued. So the sixth judge was Chief Judge Rosemary Sackett, who is now the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals. So I served with her for, about 6 years. And that was very enjoyable. She's a fine judge.
The caseload of the Court of Appeals has kind of fluctuated over the years. Do you recall some of the discussions that went on to begin with about what cases you were going to do and what cases you weren't going to do and those kind of things?
Well, I recall that fairly plainly. There were those on the Supreme Court justices who felt that the Court of Appeals should never publish any of their cases. There were some that thought that that should not be the rule, that some cases were worthy of publication, subject to the discretion of the Supreme Court. And one of the early discussions on that subject that we five on the Court of Appeals had with the Supreme Court, the question was proposed by one of the Supreme Court justices. How many cases do you think the Court of Appeals should publish? And one of the justices said, how about none? That made a significant point on us, of course, that it was going to be a long time before any of our cases would be published. And it was several years. I don't recall how many, but then that changed. The Supreme Court decided that some of the Court of Appeals cases should be published and authorized. We would send to the Supreme Court a case or two that we thought was worthy and get their approval. And some were approved and some were not.
Now, originally, did the Court of Appeals sit in bank all the time? Did you sit as five?
Yeah, as five.
And how long did that last?
That lasted until Judge Sackett was appointed the sixth judge. And then we divided into two panels of 3 judges.
Did you rotate those panels?
We did. We rotated who sat on the panels and who would be the chief judge. And all of our cases then were heard by a 3-judge panel, subject to that being changed or elevated to a 5-judge court decision, or a 6-judge court decision.
So you could put it in bank?
We could put it in bank. And we did, okay, on some. And then some of those went to the Supreme Court too, and suffered or enjoyed the same fate.
The Court of Appeals was using the Supreme Courtroom in the Capitol building at the time, is that correct?
We were.
Okay.
That was our court for all of the arguments, and the Supreme Court used it too. It was denominated the Supreme courtroom. That was never changed. And for a period of time, the Court of Appeals judges were not allowed to enter the courtroom through the conference room in the Supreme Court. We entered from the hall, through the hall door, and then went on the bench from there. And some of the judges on the Court of Appeals and some on the Supreme Court thought that wasn't very appropriate. And so the Supreme Court then, later, changed that rule so that then we entered from the conference room the same as the Supreme Court judges did. Went on the bench from there. So some of these things change over time for various reasons.
Well, I asked you a moment ago about the number of cases the Court of Appeals was doing. Was there discussion about that, about the numbers and how the casework would be divided between the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals? There
was constant discussion of the numbers and the amount of work, and who was doing the most work, too. And it was pretty obvious that the Court of Appeals had a big load, but the Supreme Court felt that's the way it's supposed to be. But the numbers were all constantly looked at to see what is an appropriate number of cases that each Court of Appeals judge can handle adequately without sacrificing the quality and just having a rush to judgment. We were always constantly aware of that, and so was the Supreme Court. So I was always looked at.
You mentioned the original members of the court and the fact that Judge Sackett was appointed later on. I'm thinking there were some other judges who you served with on the Court of Appeals. Janet Johnson.
Janet Johnson served. She was a Drake University professor. She was appointed to the Court of Appeals after Judge Sackett. Probably on the elevation of Robert Albee to the Supreme Court. And then Judge Carter was appointed to the Supreme Court.
Is that when Judge Habhab came on?
And then
I'm a little shaky on the names too, but you did serve.
I think Judge Habhab succeeded me.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was Judge Schlegel then, or?
It was Schlegel.
Okay.
I served with Judge Schlegel.
And Judge Hayden?
And Judge Hayden, yeah. I served with all of them. They were all good judges.
Just in general, how would you describe the level of collegiality amongst the judges?
I would say it was the greatest that you could hope for and obtain. We had both from the original 5 judges to the expanded number. We all got along beautifully well. And we had our arguments, and they were strong arguments, and we had some different philosophies of not philosophies in the sense of what is sometimes described as more liberal, more conservative, which I often thought are big misnomers anyway. But we'd feel each other out and have some designations of who we thought was what.
Were there a lot of dissents in those days?
Most of our opinions were without dissent. But dissents were not discouraged. Anybody that wanted to dissent, just have at it and write the dissent, and that's what we did.
Well, I do have to mention the famous case where you wrote the opinion and also dissented, so you remember that one?
I do remember that one. That came up on a 3-judge panel. Judge Sackett and Judge Hayden, I believe, were on the 3-judge panel with me, and I was assigned to write the decision. And the decision was controlled by prior decisions by the Iowa Supreme Court. And we knew that, and we discussed that, and I said, well, I'll write the majority decision following the precedent of the Iowa Supreme Court, but I don't think that precedent is right. And I want to write a dissent, too. And so they said, well, go ahead. And I did. I wrote the majority opinion with my name on it, and then I dissented with my name on it. And that was a lot of fun to do.
Well,
I had a precedent to do that, though. Justice Scott Ladd, who was Dean Mason Ladd's father, had a case where he did the same thing on the Supreme Court. And I had spotted that through some research. I thought that was kind of fun, so I did it.
The other case, of course, that comes to mind, Justice Snell, from your days on the Court of Appeals is the Gillespie versus Bain. Do you remember that case?
That case was a lot of fun, too. That case arose out of an Iowa basketball game against Purdue University. And it was a very important game because it determined the Big Ten basketball championship. And at the end of the game, a referee named James Bain called a foul on one of the Iowa players, which led to the Purdue player making a free throw, which won the game on the last play and eliminated Iowa from the Big Ten Conference championship. A man named Gillespie was the owner of a novelty shop in Iowa City where he would sell memorabilia. So he had the idea to print up T-shirts which had the picture of a man with a rope around its neck. And the caption was Jim Bain Fan Club. Well, Jim Bain didn't take nicely to that at all and sued Gillespie. And Gillespie countersued. And it came up to the Court of Appeals. And I think it was the Court of Appeals.
It was. It was the Court of Appeals.
And I was assigned to write the opinion, and so I wrote the opinion. And the big issue was whether there is any lawsuit possible against a referee for making a bad call, or at least a arguably bad call. And we decided that there was no such known tort in law known as referee malpractice.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure, you are a Hawkeye fan.
Yes, I was. I was and am a big Hawkeye fan. And so there was great disappointment among we Hawkeye fans at this result. But we really couldn't bring ourselves to find law to support that there was any such known animal as a referee malpractice. And after that, I received a letter, handwritten letter, from a lady, and it basically said, I am a little old lady, but a great Hawkeye fan. And I have watched all of the basketball games for many years. And I know that Jim Bain made a wrong call. And I can't understand why you would come to that result. As you did. So I wrote her back, and I said that, I probably said that, I don't know whether I probably did say I was a Hawkeye fan too, but our job was not to make any judgment on the basis of whether Jim Bain's call was wrong. And all we were assigned to do was to answer a legal question. And that's what we did.
Well, in that same vein, do you ever remember getting other letters from public about cases you've written or?
Oh, yes. I would off and on get a case, sometimes from prisoners, sometimes from disgruntled litigants, and sometimes from a relative or a friend. And most of them I referred to our staff person who answered letters of that note.
But you decided to answer this lady.
I did.
Do you remember then when you first applied for the Iowa Supreme Court?
I certainly do, and that was an exercise in tenacity, too, because I applied several times to be nominated for appointment to the Supreme Court, as I had when I was trying to become a district court judge, and failed. But Judge Harris, who many times was my mentor.
This is the same David Harris you mentioned before.
Yes.
Right.
Who was a sitting Supreme Court justice. And after my second disappointment, he told me, Bruce, one thing you know for sure, you're not going to get it if you don't apply. So I applied again, and that time I got nominated, and then I got appointed by Governor Branstad.
Governor Branstad. You remember him did he call you?
He did.
The governor himself?
Yeah. I was in my office in the Capitol about 5 o'clock at night, and he called me and said that he was going to appoint me and that I would probably want to call my wife right away, and I said, that's certainly true, Governor, and I thanked him. And I was, of course, very pleased and excited to get that appointment.
That was in 1987. Did you have an investiture ceremony?
Yes, yes there was. And when I was appointed to the Court of Appeals, my father had died, and but my mother was living, and she held the robe for me to don. And then when I was appointed to the Supreme Court, my mother was still living, but Anne, my wife, held the robe for me to put on that occasion. So that was kind of nice.
Who was the Chief Justice when you went on the Supreme Court?
That was C. Edmund. When I went on the Supreme Court?
Yes, on the Supreme Court.
Well, C. Edmund Moore had just retired, and then they elected Relson. I'm going back too far. Ward Relson had just retired as Chief Justice, and I was his successor. That position then was what I succeeded to. And then the Supreme Court elected Art McGivern as Chief Justice. And when I arrived to go to work, I was informed that the Supreme Court elected the Chief Justice, and that I wasn't going to have a vote because they'd already done that before I got there.
Yeah. So are you willing to disclose?
But I would have voted for Art McGivern too. He was a classmate at law school with me, and in fact we studied for tests together. So I thought that was a fine appointment. But I was mildly amused at that process.
Right. So the court was 9 members at the time, and then reduced down to 7 after 1999.
Right.
So it was always a 9-member court while you were on it, right?
Well, no. I was on it during the 7-member court. After Judge Harris retired and Judge Justice McGivern retired.
Those positions were not filled.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then I served in that numerical.
Right.
number.
And then Lou Lavorado was the Chief Justice then?
Right.
For your last part of your term.
Right.
Again, you served with a number of justices on the Supreme Court, and you had a number of cases that probably stick out in your mind. Any that pop up right away?
Well, the most contentious case was the so-called Baby Jessica case, which was, what was the name?
Well, it was initial.
BGC.
Initial, BGC, yes.
Were the initials. That involved an adoption. And the case came to the Supreme Court with the plaintiff being the father, the natural father, whose position was that he wanted the child and the adoption should be defeated and held not valid because he didn't receive proper service. And the decision went that way, with the custody being given to the natural father instead of the adoptive parents. And the adoption had been completed until the natural father filed a petition objecting and claiming that it was not valid for lack of service. 8 of the members of the Supreme Court voted that way. I did not. I was the lone dissenter, which it caused some problems because there were a lot of people that had followed this case in the press, and they felt that the adoptive parents were very good parents, and the record showed that. Abandoned any legal rights he had to that child by his total lack of interest in the child during the pregnancy. He was working in the same building as the mother, and I felt that the evidence showed that he knew of the pregnancy and had every reason to know that he was the father, but he took no steps to do anything to claim that. And the record also showed he abandoned and did not support 2 other prior to him. So that was the basis of my dissent. I felt that, and I had legal authorities to support the legal theory of abandonment. And I felt that under the facts and the law supported it, that should be the result. But 8 of my colleagues did not agree.
Do you, are you willing to discuss the kind of the back and forth that went on that Supreme Court while you were on it? The nature of the debate and the conferencing that went on?
You mean on all the cases?
Yeah, just in general, I mean.
No, it's always been very collegial. That case was more difficult for all the members of the Supreme Court, I think, because of the press paying so much attention to it. And other cases have been similarly situated, but that just happened to attract a lot of notoriety. But we discussed it and voted on it and moved on, as we did on all the other cases where there were dissents.
When you came to town for oral arguments when you were on the Supreme Court, how many days a month would you come in for that?
On the Court of Appeals was set up differently. We heard about 4 days of oral argument, and then we would go to our respective offices and work on the assigned cases. And then 2 weeks later, we would come back and conference them here in Des Moines and decide whether that was going to be the result or not, and then continue through the process of finishing them and filing them. So I was back and forth, and that would be for 2 or 3 days. So I spent the better part of each week, every other week. The Supreme Court system was different. We would hear cases for the better part of a week, and then we would disperse to our individual offices and reconvene for final voting before the next round of oral arguments.
Did you socialize amongst yourselves, both courts, either court?
Oh, yeah. We had on both courts a time in the middle of the session, Wednesday night, where we would get together and go out to have dinner together and visit and have a nice social time. On the Court of Appeals, when we started out, it was just the judges. And later, we would have special times when we would get together for dinner with the spouses. And the Supreme Court setup was always with the spouses or guests, and usually on Wednesday night we would go out to various restaurants.
Did Ann come down with you?
Kind of heal our wounds.
Oh, yeah.
As I said.
Did Ann come down with you quite a bit?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
And Ann was a full-time employed in the public health service. And she was a public health supervisor or consultant for 35 years. Well, that's the total time that she worked. She was in the Iowa Public Health Service probably 23 years. Other times she taught in nursing college. But she would be here for her meetings, fortunately, often when I would be here for court sessions. So that worked out very nicely.
You served with a number of justices over the years. You've mentioned David Harris being a mentor. And is there anyone else you would like to mention?
He would be the main one that I actually would classify as a mentor, because he guided me, not in any decisions. He never tried to influence me on a case, except during our court conferences when all the judges were present. But he just was a supporter of mine, and would at different times discuss something that was going on in government. My relationship with all of the other judges was very cordial and warm, both on the Court of Appeals and on the Supreme Court. And there was, I never witnessed any serious disgruntlements that affected the collegial nature. I never saw anything among any of the judges. So it was a wonderful experience.
You retired in 2001 and you became a senior judge, is that?
Right.
And how long were you a senior judge then?
Under the senior judge program, you can serve for 6 years. So I was a senior judge until 2007.
Did you retire at mandatory retirement age?
Yes.
Okay.
And that age is established by the legislature at 72. So I retired on my 72nd birthday. I guess I stayed until they threw me out. And I enjoyed musing on that, because my father did the same thing. Although when he was on the Supreme Court, the law was that he had to retire at age 75. So he retired on on his birthday, his 75th birthday.
Now, you did senior judge work on both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court.
Yes.
I recall.
Yeah, I did. I wrote opinions for the courts and sat on panels deciding what cases were appropriate for publication or appeal. And that was fun. It was a nice way to finish my work in appellate courts.
What have you done to keep yourself occupied since you left the court then?
A variety of things. In all honesty, it did take a while to get used to a different lifestyle. And I don't find that surprising, I guess, because I've been pretty much doing the same thing for 30 years. But after a while, and my wife saying that I better quit complaining because she wasn't going to listen to me anymore, which I guess is kind of a normal transition period. But now and after that adjustment, I play golf. I play golf in the league, the men's league, and the local golf course. And every Monday in the Old Timers League, where we travel around to 19 different courses and play golf. And we travel, and then I have traveled quite a bit. 2 years ago, we had a great trip around Cape Horn in South America. Went to 6 South American countries. That was great fun. And then I still belong to Kiwanis and enjoy that. And we attend the Civic Center theater. We're going tonight.
And the Hawkeye game.
And the Hawkeye games, right. I don't know how I managed to get that tailing of the list. But we have season tickets to all the football games. And our son now lives in Iowa City. So we stay with him and get free rent.
Where's your daughter now then?
Our daughter lives in Orlando. And we haven't been able to get her back to the Midwest. She just loves the southern climate. So,
Well, you probably like getting down there in February, don't you?
We do. We visited her many times in Florida at the appropriate time. We don't go during hurricane season, but that gives us a nice trip to visit Rebecca.
Well, Justice Snell, we made a long trip down through memory lane here, starting with Ida Grove and school and all the way up to retirement. Is there anything else that you can think of that you would want to say about your career, your life, anything else?
Well, I've been very fortunate in my life and my career, both I feel, in growing up in Ida Grove, a small community. Has some disadvantages, but a lot of advantages where young person can get a good education and have the opportunity to participate in a lot of things. And our family life was very enriching. And then my parents sacrificed to send all three of my two sisters to college. I had that advantage, which was wonderful for all of us. And then going to law school and having a very stimulating, interesting career in the law. And I have enjoyed all the different things that I have done, and I've certainly had a variety of experiences in corporate law and private practice, and working on the Attorney General's staff, which was a fine experience, and then having a full career in the judiciary. So, and working with fine people, both the judges, law clerks, staff. They've just been the finest people I could imagine to work with. Mm-hmm. That's been a stimulus and a thrill. And I've had a great life of happiness through those activities and things that I've been able to do.
Well, thank you very much.